In the next 15 minutes, you will start questioning reality and the world as we know it. But for now, sit back and relax. Enjoy the show.
But that's what's so interesting and fun and also frustrating about the subject.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like the majority of your videos. It's like, I don't know. I don't know what to think. I don't know who's full of shit. I don't know how much. I mean, I was watching the Townsend Brown one today. And you were talking about John Lear and John Lear's connection to Bob Lazar and the possibility that Lear was spreading disinformation.
Yep.
Yeah.
So like, I've, by the way, since making that video, I've become more positive on Lazar just insofar as I think he was at S4 Area 51. And there's going to be a great documentary coming out by my buddy Luigi on this called Project Gravatar. And I think there's going to be a lot of corroborating evidence that he was at least there, and a lot in his story checks. But I think you have to view, and I even say that in this video, that I think a lot of this story could be true. You can't, I think, view the Bob Lazar story, you can't just take it at face value. Because John Lear and he were friends. John Lear is this babbling UFO nut. He's obsessed with UFOs. He's writing weird, like, disinfo-y style stuff with Bill Cooper, Behold the Pale Horse guy.
Which is a wild book.
Yeah. And so he's crazy.
Doesn't he talk about bases on the moon?
He talks about bases on the moon. Lear also talked about a soul catcher that like controlled our souls on the moon.
Oh boy.
And so Lear was like flooding the zone with all sorts of weird shit. Lear comes from an interesting family.
Right.
His father is Bill Lear, who's the autopilot wizard. He created the first business, basically the first private jet, the Learjet, in the 50s and 60s, and was an associate of a guy I hope we talk about named Thomas Townsend Brown.
Yeah.
And so I think, Lear was engaging in all sorts of bullshit. Was he a useful idiot or was he a sophisticated agent provocateur? I'm totally open to him having been a useful idiot. In fact, there is a video of him saying, I was told, I was given all the Bob Lazar files or whatever, and I was told about, to actually, like, he said a guy named Admiral McClellan knew that I ran my mouth. I even have this video actually on the doc that I sent you, Jamie. He says, knew that I ran my mouth. So that's why we got Bob the job or whatever. We knew that part of this stuff would leak. And it was like this limited hangout strategy on behalf of this guy named Admiral McClellan or whatever. And he was this useful idiot to sort of get it out. And I think
For what purpose?
Recruiting. You give people high level. Yeah.
Here, we'll hear it here.
And the MJ personnel, the original 12, have all passed away. So they get different people into these positions of MJ 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and taken over. It's degraded, so it's almost political now instead of like it was when Truman originally formed the MJ-12. It turns out that MJ-1, the head of MJ-12, is a guy named Admiral Mike Mullen. He wanted to get some of the information out because he didn't want to. He thought that some of this information should be out in the public. We don't need to keep all this secrecy. So he decided trying to figure out a way to get it to the public. So he knew that I was a blabbermouth and I would tell anything I knew. They investigated Bob Lazar and they knew that he was a genius, but that he had a background such that they could instantly discredit him. They removed all his records from MIT, from Caltech, so he couldn't prove anything. He'd go back to Cal, no, I don't see any records here. And, well, I was here. Well, no, you weren't. And he also, up in Reno at one time, he ran a cat house there. And I forget what the name of the Honeysuckle Ranch it was. So they chose him because not only could he probably help them because he was so smart, and as a matter of fact, he's the one that named Unpenium 115. He's the one that told them what that was, and they didn't know when he went there. They didn't know what it was. He was the one that told them that's element 115, and then told them why and how he'd figured it out. But they decided to pick on Bob, to go up there to work at S4 because they knew that Bob would tell me instantly and then I would blab the whole thing. And that was their modus operandi, was to get the information out and gauge what it did to the public, how they accepted it, and then pull back and say, oh, no, it was all a mistake. Bob Lazar is a fraud. He never worked here. He doesn't have any credentials like that. And they could back away and get out of it. So that was what Mike McClellan came up with.
Isn't that crazy? Weird. And to me,
kind of makes sense a little bit, though.
It does, and that doesn't make Bob Lazar still not the most interesting story in the world. Like, he's not saying it didn't happen, right? He's just saying that this happened as part of this limited hangout strategy, where they knew that they could delete the records at MIT. They knew that they could stigmatize him because of the brothel. They knew that he was this not traditionally trained engineer who just happened to strap a ramjet on the back of a Honda or whatever and meet Edward Teller serendipitously. They knew that they had plausible deniability on all that stuff. There's a great line in the Oppenheimer movie where Leslie Groves, played by Matt Damon, says, "I didn't hire Oppenheimer in spite of his communist sympathies. I hired him because of them." So if you have a top secret program, you want compromise on people. You want to be able to blackmail them. And so I think, that should be taken at face value, in my opinion. And the reason that the story itself can't be taken at face value and needs to be seen through that lens is Lear and Bob Lazar were friends before Bob Lazar got a job at Area 51, S4. And so if you have a top secret program, you're going to do a basic background check. And Lear is going to come up as a guy with a UFO blog, right? And then the CIA is all over the UFO program, right? And he was flying CIA cargo jets. And he says that he disaffiliated in 83. That's bullshit. George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell have talked about how that's BS. And actually he disaffiliated much later, into the mid-80s or whatever. Why would you continue to pay a guy who is leaking your crown jewel secrets?
And then that brings us to Lazar's depiction of how these things worked. That they somehow or another bend gravity. These things that he worked on, which is the model that's on the desk there. That's supposedly a detailed model of what that thing looked like that he worked on. The sport model, I think they called it.
That's what he called it,
Yeah. When you watch him talk and you hear him give his description of his time working there and what he saw and what he thinks those things are, what was your take on that?
I thought it was curious and interesting. I mean, I've been to Area 51. I didn't see any flying saucers or anything like that.
What did you see?
I saw Defense Department experiments being performed and training activities and that sort of thing. Nothing that the taxpayer would object to. But,
of course not.
But it's a big range. There's a lot of stuff going on out there, and there's a lot of adjacent ranges. If you look at the
Area
map,
S4,
actually,
where he was.
That's what he said. Yeah.
That's what he said. What's your take
I
on
found
him?
his explanations curious.
Yeah. How so?
The complexity of it, and the fact that he talked about Laurentium, for example, and then decades later, it turns out that apparently there is a more stable form of that than.
That's element 115?
Sounds right. I couldn't tell you for sure.
But it's called Laurentium?
Laurentium.
That sounds like something from Battlestar Galactica. You know, we need the
all this stuff
to power
takes
the
you
ship.
into that,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So now I'm a little skeptical about his claims, I have to say. A friend of mine claims to know the gal who was his supervisor when he worked out there and knows what he was actually doing and where he was located, and claims that he was a guy who checked radiation on badges.
That's it.
Yeah.
And so all the rest is fiction.
According to that story.
And this is a person that you know?
Yeah.
Maybe that person's full of shit.
Maybe.
How about that?
You know, I don't have the ground
government.
Truth on this,
Yeah.
but
It's interesting.
he did falsify his educational records, and he's been involved in some other things, and it just doesn't.
You talking about the MIT records?
Yeah.
Yeah. He explained that to me. He said that he was working on something for the government and they sent him to MIT to learn something. And I can't say too much. I'll tell you off air because he told me not to talk about it. But it makes more sense when you hear his description of it, that essentially it wasn't documented that he was studying there. because what he was doing was really a terrible thing, a terrible experiment they were working on. When I explain it to you, maybe it'll make more sense.
Okay.
Maybe not, though. Maybe he's full of shit. Maybe he lied about that. What's interesting, though, is he's told the same exact story since the late 80s. And he doesn't seem full of shit. Now, some people are really good at lying. And, I've been tricked before, and I'm sure you have, too. There's some people that are just sociopaths. They're really good at...
Yeah, they don't even, know they're lying. They're, convinced in their own head while they're spinning it.
He's obviously very intelligent, and he obviously knows a lot about science. He knows a lot about propulsion systems, and he really did work at Los Alamos, which is interesting because he's actually on the employee roster.
Yeah.
And they tried to say that he didn't. He knew people that were there. He knew the layout of the building. When he went there with George Knapp, they went through the building. He knew exactly where everything was, and he knew the people that worked there. So he really did work there, apparently, allegedly. His story, what's interesting to me is that, again, it's the same story over and over and over again. And then what's also interesting to me is that he knew and took friends to a place where they were testing these things out. And he knew where it was, and he knew when they were doing it, and he brought his friends out there, and that's when they got arrested. And
it's a very, I think there's some consistency there. That is hard to explain. How would he know where to go and what was going on? There are some possible answers to that. I've poked into this a bit. Supposedly, there was a bar off base where the scientists and a lot of the aviators and people would go and hang out. He was frequented that place and picked up information. So, I hear stories on both sides of this. I don't know what the ground truth is, and I remain skeptical. But hey, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on.
I enjoyed his company. I went to dinner with him and Jeremy, and I talked to him for several hours on the podcast and off the podcast. I don't know, I don't. But it's a weird one because he never made any money doing that. He never made any money telling that story.
I'll tell you another story offline. We can exchange stories offline.
I'm excited. I can't wait for this to be over now.
Now, believe it or not, I'm not into UFOs. I don't follow stories or,
Even after your experiences?
No, I'm fascinated with the technology, and it irks me like every night I go to sleep that, that it was my own doing, essentially, that prevented me from continuing on in the project. I mean, it's that to be on that cutting edge of technology is so alluring to me.
Right.
But by the same token, I don't really care that there's aliens or where they come from. I mean, the prize is the technology, and that's what I'm fascinated by. But so I don't listen to UFO stories and that sort of thing. But George Knapp is, he's the guy that has the contacts and tries to thread everything together. And what he recently told me is he found, I don't know, it was either documentation or people that he spoke to. It's that the existence of this project, the project that I was on, it's something that they seem to take out every 8 or 10 years.
So that's a very specific memo, and this is actually, this is the first time I'll be very clear with people about it. It's a big topic of conversation right now. It's called the Wilson Memo. You can look it up. Admiral Wilson met with a scientist who's actually was featured in one of my films. Everybody has been debating whether or not this document of a conversation with a sitting admiral at the time is a real document. It's an actual conversation that happened, and this document is real. Everybody wants to know. The world is going crazy right now in the UFO world. I'll tell you straight up right now, I'm in the position to know, and it is a real document, that it is real. So the conversation you read in that conversation was had. I can't attest to every...
You're not being very clear.
Sure.
Please.
No problem. So there was a document that is circulating right now that is really big. It's going around everywhere. People are asking and wondering.
What is this document?
It's called the Wilson Memo, is how you can find it online. Or the Wilson Leak.
There it is. Jimmy's got it. The Wilson Memorandum. Use of human volunteers.
No.
Make sure that was it. Yeah.
No, that's not it.
Okay.
Yeah. So Admiral Wilson meets with this scientist, and they have this discussion, oddly enough, at special projects at EG&G. And if I remember, the document is from 2001. I'm telling everybody right now, it's real. And we'll see, my history's pretty good with like saying if something's real or not, right? So here we go. The document comes out. They meet at EG&G Special Projects. In 1989, they stumble into a problem. This happens. They put the technology away, and then they bring it back out and see if material science has caught up and if they can make any progress. So this document kind of talks about this process. The big thing I get from it, and a lot of it's vindicating to Bob, and one of the things it's vindicating, besides the EG&G thing, is that private industry, so this guy's an admiral, and he says, I found out about your SAP, your Special Access Program. I need to know about it. And he's going to a private part of industry, and he is denied access. And he says, I should be running this program. And they were able to deny him access. So I think the takeaway here is, check it out. I'm telling you that is an actual correct, that is a leak. Now, everything said in that document, I don't know.
What are you talking about? What is said in that document specifically?
It's between a scientist and an admiral that are sitting and they're having a meeting, and they're talking about the search for the UFO subject, the search to get special access program access to all of these different things like reverse engineering programs. So in this document, they talk about it. I believe that this document, the person that went was employed by Robert Bigelow, one of the guys that has a couple orbiting satellites and all that stuff.
He's the guy who owns Skinwalker Ranch.
No, he's not. No? He was the guy that owns Skinwalker.
He used to own it. Okay.
Yeah, he used to own it. There's a new owner, and I interviewed him for my other film, but there's a new owner, and you'll be hearing a lot more about that soon. But there's stuff that you'll be hearing about Skinwalker Ranch soon because there's a new owner. Anyway, the whole point of this insertion here is just that document kind of validates a lot of this idea Bob just said, that they make a little progress, then they can't go anywhere, they tuck it away, and then they bring it back out 10 years later and start working on it. What is the limiting factor? I think Bob should speak on this, but it's the material science.
Yeah, it's really where physics is, so I can see them doing that. I mean, I didn't have any information on that, but I think what George uncovered is probably accurate, that we try and do what we can, and once we reach a roadblock going, we really can't figure it out, it's just friggin' wait, put the thing away, wait for science to catch up, and a decade later, let's take the project out again and see, all right, now where can we go?
But there's got to be someone who remains informed, right?
Oh, yeah.
So you've got your scientists like you and Barry. You got your people that you compartmentalize. You got these people working on this project.
Yeah, there has to be some people that know everything.
You've got security, and then someone's going to be on the outside saying, hey, we need people to guard this building. Don't let anybody in for 10 years.
I think a lot of that is private industry, and I think that's how they keep it. Yeah, I think that's how they because the government is just so leaky. I think that's kind of what they're doing.
That's what the document kind of proves. You just articulated that it is in control of private industry.
What private industry? Some aerospace company, something?
I don't know.
Yeah, the admiral wouldn't name it in the car in the conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
So they still have these things, supposedly.
I would guess. I mean, I don't have any information on that.
Have you ever asked anyone that has any inkling of any idea of where they got them or how they got them?
No, but something must have been said to me from Barry, but it was just too long ago, and I can't quite remember what was said, but it just left a seed in my mind. I think at least one of them was part of an archaeological dig. So it's old. At least one of them is old. I don't know if it was the one I worked on, but I remember something to do with an archaeological dig.
Whoa.
So that means it's not just old, it's ancient.
That'd be a great Steven Spielberg movie.
Yeah.
Right?
As all of it would, yeah.
Yeah, that tripped me out when he said that for the first time.
Yeah. That's a freak out right there. Just a couple of dudes with some brushes looking for a Tyrannosaurus Rex bone. They hit metal.
And when did they find it? That they have 9 of them.
Yeah. Well, and how could we have not heard about that? What about the guys with the brushes? How could you uncover something like that? And
Joe's newspaper at home does. I mean, they said it on that first day.
Oh, you mean the Roswell Billy record?
Yeah, the one you told me. Yeah,
I have a cover. What is this here, Jamie?
This is the document, but I had to do some digging to find it.
Yeah, it's just kind of... Yeah, so this is where they meet at EG&G, and this is Admiral Wilson, and there's a lot more coming out. Now, I want to be clear, George didn't put this out. He didn't leak this out to anybody. I can tell you how
I recorded this conversation.
So this was an employee of, at the time, Robert Bigelow.
And this is in 2002?
Right. Do you remember when he had that government contract called OSAP the world all knows about now? And he had NIDS that studied the ranch. So that $22 million, everybody is saying it was for ATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. The $22 million was for OSAP that was pushed through Congress, 3 congressmen, right, an astronaut. It was pushed through. And that's what that $22 million, by the way, they spend more money on Viagra every year than they do studying UFOs, if it was just this program, which I think is funny.
They probably make a lot more money from Viagra
they probably do.
From UFOs, too.
Well, you never know how it seeds into population. But anyway, this program, this is what was the mother program. So it got the $22 million. And really, it was to study Skinwalker Ranch. Oddly enough, that $22 million all was inspired by the phenomenon they were seeing at Skinwalker Ranch, because the scientists, they're seeing vehicles come through like a space in the sky.
Yeah, we went there. I went there with Duncan. Yeah, we interviewed a bunch of people that seemed full of shit, but a couple that didn't. It was very, very interesting.
Totally. And if you look, I spent a lot of time in the area. I'm not talking about those stories. I'm saying there were scientists hired by the government, right, through Bigelow to study the ranch because they thought it was important. And, whatever. The point is that $22 million was to study that. Then we have ATIP, which is like an auxiliary kind of program of military sightings, like Commander Fravers and that sort of thing. This document is just one of those things that has now come forward that through the Bigelow studies, it was government funded, and then it was personally funded and then government funded. It's just one of those things that kind of shakes you, because you got this military guy who can't get access because of the private industry that's holding these non-terrestrial materials, that they can't study it. So that's the claim right now. Give it some time, let people dig more into this. It's fascinating, man.
If you enjoyed today's video, please share your thoughts in the comments section. And if you want more of these, please subscribe. Until next time, you are watching JRE Clips Conspiracy.